So today we are going to revisit Weston, West Virginia. We are finally going to look at the Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. If you've ever gotten into a fight with someone about which is more haunted, the Trans Allegheny or the West Virginia State Penitentiary, and now you're no longer allowed back in that Applebee's, go ahead and smash that subscribe button. Guys, I'm the best Virginian. I cover West Virginia history, West Virginia travel, a little bit of true crime, a little bit of the paranormal, a little bit of Fallout 76. And today, we're heading down to Lewis County, we're heading down to Weston, West Virginia, where we're going to talk about the Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Now, for simplicity's sake, for the remainder of this video, I'm either going to refer to the Trans Allegheny Lunatic Asylum as either just the Trans Allegheny or Weston Hospital. So in the mid-1850s, the state of Virginia decided that it needed to build another mental health facility somewhere in the state. Now, several cities were scouted out, and most people thought that Wheeling was going to be the home of this new facility. Now, Weston ultimately won because Weston was right at the intersection of two major Virginia roads. This would allow the movement of building supplies and other materials into town very easily, along with the movement of patients into the town. The second reason was because the Kirkbride plan actually gave preferential treatment to rural areas over more hustle and bustle urban areas. Now, to give a little bit of context to what the Kirkbride plan was, Kirkbride was a physician, a very early psychiatrist, and he had visited mental health facilities all around the United States and all over the world. What he wanted to do was to put a plan into place, a series of guidelines that would revolutionize and standardize mental health as a whole. So it went beyond just treatment alone. It was, it took geographical location into effect. Again, it preferred rural areas to more urbanized areas. It took architecture into account. He preferred a lot of sunlight, a lot of fresh air. So if you look at some of the pictures I took, even though there are no overhead lights in a lot of these areas, some of these hallways are very well lit just from natural light coming through these big windows along the side of the building. The building was also built north to south, so when the sun rises, the sunlight comes in to the front of the building, and as the sun sets, the sun comes in the back of the building, again, to try and maximize the amount of natural sunlight in the building. He also wanted his facilities to be self-sufficient, allowing patients that could work the ability to work, to give them a sense of worth, structure, and community. Construction began in 1858, and absolutely nothing weird happened between then and the finishing of the construction. Just kidding. The United States went to war with the United States. The Civil War broke out almost as soon as construction of the Trans Allegheny began. Now, remember when I said the Trans Allegheny was built in Weston because it was where two major highways intersected, and that this made it easy for them to bring things like building materials and patients into the area. Well, if you can do that, it's also a good way to bring in things like soldiers and supplies and cannons and stuff like that. So war was coming to the town of Weston. Now, it's also important to note that the state of Virginia footed the bill for the Trans Allegheny. There was some $30,000 worth of gold at a bank in Weston that belonged to the state of Virginia that had just seceded from the United States. And Weston and a lot of the areas north of Weston were very pro-union. And they're sitting on all this money that the state of Virginia wanted back. So what did they do? Well, they talked to some of their union friends and they stole it. Yes, the first major bank heist in West Virginia was actually a military operation where Union forces came in. They arrested some prevalent Southern sympathizers. They went to this bank and they said, give us the $30,000 that was allotted for building materials and wages in the construction of the Trans Allegheny. Now, they did kind of haggle a bit because the guy who owned the bank said that if they took all the money, it would basically ruin him. He would basically have to go out of business. And the union officials kind of decided that, yeah, if we do that, it could actually tip the scale of favor towards the Confederacy, because essentially by taking all the money, they would be crashing the local economy for Weston. So they took about $27,000, which this is 1860s $27,000. So we're talking about millions of dollars today. And they took it to the young, budding government of Loyal, Virginia, the unofficial government that would eventually become the official state of West Virginia. Now, the town of Weston would change hands several times during the war. For the first couple years, the only residents there were soldiers and horses. The original hospital was built to house 250 patients, and the first 9 arrived in 1864, all of which were women that were previously being housed in a treatment facility in Ohio. And at this time, it was super easy to end up being institutionalized. Things like hysteria, epilepsy, syphilis, asthma, being kicked in the head by a horse. And while it was fairly easy to get people admitted into the Trans Allegheny, it was almost impossible to get them back out without the consent of the person that had them committed. There are several stories of guys getting together with their drinking buddies, going to officials with stories of how their wives were, acting crazy and out of control, getting them institutionalized, and then just never checking them back out, just kind of abandoning them there. And I don't know how true that is. I don't know how often that actually occurred. There are several stories about it. It is also considered quite possible that this happened on a fairly regular basis with both children and the elderly. And with this being right at the end of the Civil War, a lot of people were suffering from depression, PTSD, and because of the introduction of opioids for surgical purposes, this led to some of the first cases of non-alcoholic substance abuse issues in the United States. And essentially, from the opening of the Trans Allegheny, it was plagued with overcrowding and understaffing. While the peak population was only supposed to be 250 patients, it would eventually hold over 2,600 in the 1950s. Over 10 times what it was originally built to house. And because of this, medical staff felt like they had to do something to cut down the population so that they could better treat the patients coming through the door. This caused them to basically try to adopt any measure they could, any treatment they could, to try and help patients. This included hydrotherapy, which involved placing patients in super cold baths, sometimes for days at a time. This included insulin shock therapy, which involved forcing patients into diabetic comas, electroshock therapy, which just zapping patients with electricity, quite regularly, restraining patients and isolating them in order to try to keep them from being threats to themselves and others. And in the 1950s, at the peak of the hospital's crowding, when beds were placed in every available spot, and sanitation and staffing was at its absolute worst, lobotomies became the preferred method of treatment. The method was patented by one Dr. Walter Freeman as a cure-all, and basically it involved just running a spike through the top of the eye and severing connections in the prefrontal cortex, which I imagine probably worked as well for treating mental illness as getting kicked in the head by a horse. Now, eventually, Dr. Freeman would get his license pulled. There were several reasons for this. He didn't practice sanitation. He was really a show-off. It said that he would do multiple lobotomies at the same time. He would do one after another without sterilizing or changing tools in between. It said at one point he accidentally killed a patient when he was doing lobotomy, decided to pose for a picture, and the spike kind of just went way too far in and killed the patient immediately. Now, due to a rise in alternative, more successful, less horrific treatment methods, and the deterioration and changes in building codes, the hospital was forced to close in 1994. Today, the hospital serves as a museum, not just to the hospital itself, but also the town of Weston and West Virginia as a whole. Now, there are artifacts ranging from Civil War artifacts to just Weston artifacts, hospital artifacts. There's also art projects that were actually done by patients themselves, various restraints and treatment methods, even a projector that shows actual lobotomy footage just on repeat. If that's what makes you interested in visiting the Trans Allegheny, like if that was a selling point for you, they sell snacks in the lobby. I'm not judging, but the Trans Allegheny was really a part of the community. It was really a part of day-to-day life in Weston. There were baseball games played in the front yard, football games. There were dances and even high school proms held in the dance hall, in the theater portion of the Trans Allegheny. And patients that were able to work, many of them worked in the glass factories, in the businesses in the Weston area during the daytime. It was a great experience to finally be able to tour this facility. And at times I was in awe at just how much work they had done to restore this facility. There are various pictures, as you go through on this tour that shows what the facility looked like when they first obtained it in 2007. You can immediately look at just the area around you, at how much work they have done, not just to restore it, but also fill it with decorations and furniture of time period. They've really paid close attention to detail in getting that part of it right, which I think is very commendable. And I really, really appreciate it while going on the tour. And if you ever find yourself in the Weston area, take the time to tour the Trans Allegheny. They do several different types of tours that really cater to a wide variety of interest. I'm kind of interested in going back and checking out the CI, the Criminally Insane Institute, and maybe doing one of the photography tours. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do any video. They don't want people doing videos of the walking tours themselves. I don't know if I'd be allowed to video if I went back and just did the kind of self-guided, supervised photography tour, but that's something I would definitely be interested in. Let me know if you guys would be interested in seeing me do that. And until next time, folks, don't forget to stay wild, stay wonderful, and I'll talk to you later.